Wow, good morning. Hello. Welcome to the 2025 Patent Math Conference, where we focus on bringing evidence-based practices to you and your students. My name is Jared Campbell. I'm the statewide lead for a math initiative here at Patent, and I have the pleasure of welcoming you to our conference today. This conference is one way that Patent provides support to local education agencies as part of the state system of supports under the guidance of the Pennsylvania Department of Education, Bureau of Special Education. As we begin, I want to thank Dr. Angela Kirby and Mr. Chris Cherney, our directors in the central office at Patent, for their vision and leadership. I'd also like to thank our Patent Mathematics Initiative team members and their support of this event. A special thanks to Dr. Erica Karuder and Allison Moyer for their work on the special poster and video sessions that you're going to have an opportunity to see around lunchtime. And a huge thank you to our lead event organizer, Lauren Lutz, without whom this conference just simply wouldn't be possible. So thank you, Lauren. Thank you to our presenters. They represent the best the field has to offer, and they were generous enough to share their time and their expertise with us. And lastly, thank you to you, our participants. You've given your time to be part of this conference, and we trust that you will find it worth your time and your effort. All handouts are available in the Patent Events platform. Make sure to visit the credit tab on Patent Events for directions on receiving credit for the conference, as well as a certificate of attendance should you need one for your records. Questions for our presenters will be collected via the chat and addressed at the end of the session if time permits. This is our keynote session, Mind Over Math, Cognitive Techniques for Retaining Mathematical Knowledge, presented by Dr. Paul Riccomini. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Riccomini.
Thank you, Jared. Glad to be here. And I just want to take a minute to echo what Jared just said about how great it is to see this many teachers taking time out of their summer to try to learn and improve what they're doing to better support kids in math class. And educators never get enough credit for what they do. So as Jared said, my name is Paul Riccomini, and I focus a lot of my energy and time on instructional techniques and practices to support kids in mathematics with a slant towards kids with disabilities. And today we are going to dive into the cognitive techniques that can help kids with retention. And this is an area that I really started to focus on probably in the last 8 to 10 years, because as I reflected back upon my classroom teaching as both a special education teacher and a high school math teacher, I personally struggled with retention. What I mean by that is I saw my kids learning and then seemingly not remembering later on, and I also struggled with how to address it. I was absolutely doing things that I thought would help with retention, but I still was kind of in this bottleneck where I was watching kids learn and then they couldn't remember it. Little did I know that there is an entire area of science devoted to how to help kids with retention that has really blossomed over the last 10 years. And as I delve into this research and these techniques, it became very clear to me that the things I was doing to help with retention were in fact not aligned with the science. So that's where I really started to focus. I've done a lot of work across Pennsylvania, both at the school and district level, as well as IUs, and also at Patent. Some of you may have been in the 2-day series that I did at each of the Patent offices. So we're going to dive in. You're going to get the speed dating of retention strategies today. You're going to get the Cliff Note version. I hope to pique your interest, give you some resources at the end where you can do some further learning on these techniques. The good thing is they're not overly complicated to learn. So we are going to dive right into it. I know that the handouts are available in a variety of locations, but I also made a Google Drive, and there's a QR code. There's the material handouts in there, as well as some other resources, as well as the Patent website as well. So Mind Over Matter, we are going to dig into retention techniques, how to help our kids remember what we are teaching them. That is the goal. So we're going to first start talking about the cognitive underpinnings. And this is something that really, for me personally, began to really make a lot of sense when I work with teachers, is to get a little bit out of the research, so to speak, like this study says this, and kind of get into the cognitive underpinnings of learning and remembering so that teachers have a very good understanding of why these strategies help with retention. So we're going to dive into this. There are 3 techniques that we are going to talk about. As I said, we're going to kind of get the Cliff Notes version, and then some resources for you to kind of develop some more knowledge of these techniques. But there's 3 questions that I kind of want to throw out there to get your mind thinking. So the first thing is, what are the current activities that you're doing focused on content that you have already taught? All right. So you've taught it, they've learned it, you've tested it. What happens after that? That's what I want you to start thinking about. High tech, low tech, worksheets, home, all of the scenarios, games, all the activities you do after something has been taught, learned, and tested. Next, I also want you to start thinking about, okay, so all these things I'm doing, how much time in my class am I spending on them? Now, this is going to vary by grade level. It's probably going to vary by day. Sometimes you spend a lot of time on review activities like right before a test, right before the Keystone or the PSSA, but kind of in a mind, like how much time am I spending on activities to help kids remember what I'm teaching? And then the next thing, as we learn the strategies, I really want you to do a kind of a deep reflection on the techniques you're currently using and can they be adjusted to better align with the science of retention. And some are a minor tweak away, others are a little bit bigger way. So kind of really, this is going to set the tone. These are the questions that I want you to start thinking about as we move through the session today. So I want to start with talking about how fast do we forget. Now, if you notice, I have the we in quotes. I used to call it how fast do students forget? And what I'm realizing in this body of research, it's not students. This is everybody. Everybody learns something, whether it's in math or out of math class, in your real life, you learn someone's name, we forget as time moves forward. So this is not just a math scenario. This is how people learn and remember things. But one of the things that was really struck me is when I came across this forgetting curve. Now, I just came across it in the last 10 years. It's been around since the early 1880s, is I think what I've traced it back to. This is how fast we forget things. So technically, it's called learning decay. So you learn something in that short-term moment, you've learned it, you're good at it. But as time goes on, especially if you're not doing it, you begin to lose it. What struck me was how fast we can lose things. So in 10 days, we can lose almost 80% of what we just demonstrated. This is even more problematic for our kiddos that have learning challenges because they're not getting all the way up this learning curve. So they're already halfway down. So they have less to lose and it's harder to recover. Your more advanced kids or your kids that are being successful in math, they're going to climb up into this 80 to 90 range. So when they lose some, they're dropping down into the 70s and they will recover it faster. So this is an issue with all students. I don't want anyone thinking this is just kids with disability. It's more pronounced for students that are struggling, but this is across the board. What I'm talking about today should not be viewed as an intervention, should not be used as the short-term kind of activity. It should be viewed as how can I incorporate these techniques into my math routine? That's the key with these, is a math routine. So what we're going to focus on is, well, how do we help kids keep more of what they're learning? Now, here's your first piece. Content in math matters. Some content is not a retention issue. Like when kids start learning to write numbers, they don't forget to write the numbers. They are having the initial issues in learning because they're going to be writing numbers all the time. So some content, because once we learn it, we keep using it, is less susceptible to retention. But there's a whole lot of content that we spend a big chunk of time on. We move on. It's not really happening. It's not really visible. And kids, that's where the learning decay kicks in. So content is a big piece of this, deciding what to do. But what we're really going to dig into is this diagram. And I know some of you are probably either rolling your eyes or laughing if you've been in my sessions previously, because this is my anchor picture. I'm sure there's better ones out there, but you know how once you get used to doing something, you don't really want to change it up too much. But this is a diagram that is representing the cognitive process that is involved with learning and remembering. This is what we as a teacher are trying to address. So we're trying to tap into this to change it. That's the key. And but learning has a couple of different phases. Now I'm kind of simplifying this learning progression into the front end and the back end. So when you're trying to learn something new, that's the front end, the initial acquisition. When you're trying to retain something, that's the back end. Now, in math, there's a lot of this interaction synergy happening all the time because our content is a progression. So a lot of what we previously learn is going to be the foundation of what we move forward, which is why math is very susceptible to retention issues. So the key, what you want to know as a teacher, and what I'm going to tell you, you absolutely have heard before. It's just once we get into the classroom, the noise, and what I mean by noise is all the other 10,000 things that aren't instructional that we teachers have to do. So you have not spent a day in the classroom and don't understand there's 10,000 other things that we have to do, and we're just not focused on instruction. So it's there. We kind of forget about it. So I'm just going to take you through this. Now we're focusing on the back end today. But when you are teaching something new to kids, the first part of the cognitive process that you are trying to tap into is called the sensory registry. This is how kids take in the information. And the primary way that kids take in information is going to be auditory or visually, just like you all are doing here. You're hearing what I'm saying and you're seeing what I'm saying. So that's how you're taking in that information. Now in math, at the younger levels, we will use manipulatives. So now we're adding another way for kids to take in information. And all these are happening at the same time. There's not one way. We're not blindfolding kids saying, oh, you're going to only learn by hearing, or we're not plugging their ears and they only see. These are all happening at the same time. But as you are presenting the topic in whatever way, whether it's a teacher-led activity or the kids are working together or they're doing some task, they're taking this information in. That happens in a couple of seconds. As they take it in, it gets dumped into the working short-term memory. Now, this is where the learning is really happening. So strategies to help kids take in information through the sensory registry are going to do something to better organize it. So that's where you have graphic organizers, anchor charts, task lists, things that organize the information, helps them better take it in. Once it gets put into working memory, this is where the wheels start grinding. The kids are grappling with the information. They're trying to make sense of it. They're trying to connect it to previous information. You may have tried to help them connect. Hey, remember when we did this? Well, this is now a different variation of that. So we are, as a teacher, we're working to really try to make this working memory efficient. Now, the issue with working memory is it's limited. So once you take in so much information, your working memory is going to get overloaded. And once it gets overloaded, learning stops. So we have to pay attention to the amount of information. So techniques that are going to help kids when they're in the working memory phase, so they've taken the information in, is going to be some kind of scaffold that is trying to offload working memory. So as kids are grappling with information, and think about in math class, at some point there's going to be a transition of more responsibility to the kid. Sometimes this is referred to as guided practice or a gradual fade. So as the kids are doing more of the work, think about when they're beginning to practice, they are super slow. They make a lot of errors and they need a lot of our support. But as they begin to practice more, they start to become more confident, more independent, more accurate, more fluent. It is at that point where the information is now beginning to be moved. And it's moved out of the working memory, short-term memory, into the long-term memory. So this is an important part of retention. We have to recognize that the strategies to help kids with retention are going to do something to force the retrieval into the working memory. I'm sorry, into the long-term memory. And these are different parts of the brain. So the fancy word for what I just described, learning, is called encoding. So when you learn something, you're encoding that into a schema that is stored in your brain. It's a memory, if you will. Now, we don't really use that in education, but it's a memory. So when you want kids to retain something, you want them to access that memory or access the schema, retrieve where it is stored. So strategies that we're going to talk about today are going to force the issue. Now, when I say force the issue, it's going to be designed into the activity. So the techniques that we're going to learn today do not help in the initial learning. And those activities that we do for the initial learning don't really help with retention. So it's important to recognize that if your purpose of an activity is retention, then it's got to be designed in a very specific way with what I call key mechanisms. And that's what we're going to dive into today. So what we have learned and what this research on retention clearly shows is that when you're teaching something new, so you're in your chapter, you're teaching it new the first time, they're grappling with, they're beginning to learn it, they're beginning to acquire it, and then you give them a test. What they do on that test is no real indication of if they're going to retain it. It only is what they can do at that moment. So now, with that said, if they don't learn it the first time, they have nothing to retain. But when kids demonstrate they've learned something on that immediate test, celebrate, but recognize now you have to do something to help the kids retain it or keep it accessible. So what we have really learned in this body of work on retention is, in order for an activity to actually support, boost, enhance a kid's retention, is that it must be designed in a way that forces the students to retrieve information repeatedly. So that's the key. Retrieve repeatedly. And that is a two-word phrase that I want you to remember. So anytime in the next school year where you are doing an activity that you're saying, okay, I've already taught this, I want to make sure they can remember it. You need to ask yourself, is this activity designed in a way that is making the kids repeatedly retrieve information? That is the key. And if it doesn't do that, you may have a wonderful activity that is not helping with retention. So that's the kind of the cognitive foundational piece here, that when you are designing an activity, you are trying to tap in to this cognitive process. And today we are tapping into the long-term memory. So how do I boost retention? All right, so how do I help my kids? Now, if I could kind of talk with you and see your faces, I'm going to just go out on a limb, and I think you'll agree with me that everybody in this room is saying, my kids, I'm struggling with retention. They're not forgetting. Now, I know some of you are like, well, I'm having a hard time getting the kids to learn something. I agree 100%. There are kids that struggle on the front end. We are focusing on the back end today. My afternoon session is going to be more focused on the front end if you want to attend that session. But the three techniques all have key mechanisms that force the retrieval. So the three techniques are spaced learning over time, interleaving practice, and practice test retrieval. And the mechanisms for each, for spaced learning over time, it's windows of time. So we're going to require you to think about timing. For interleaving, it's the sequence of problems. And if you've been in any of my sessions, you know what I'm going to say next. Number 2 on this is not happening in math. It is not built into the curriculum. It is not built into computer programs, and it's counterintuitive to what we think about math practice. I also should have mentioned the spaced learning over time can actually be used in multiple subject areas. Interleaving is math specific, although they're starting to expand the research into some grammar rules and foreign language. And then the third one is practice test retrieval. And it kind of is leveraging this idea of a free recall paired with feedback in a low stakes kind of activity. So these are the 3 techniques that you all should be thinking about when you think about retention activity. So when you say, okay, we learned this, it was 2 chapters ago, I need to make sure they can remember it. Then this is where one of these 3 need to come into play. All right, now another thing, because I believe the PSSA scores have just come out recently. If you increase your kids' retention, so if you increase the information that they have accessible, you are going to likely see increases on these end of year tests because they're testing what kids remember. All right, so we're going to start with spaced learning over time. And as I said at the beginning, this is the speed dialing of retention strategies or speed dating of retention strategies. We're going to go through these, go through the key elements, try to wet your whistle to get you interested in this. So we're going to start with the slot. Now, these are in no particular order. Don't interpret anything I'm saying as this is best and so forth. What I do think is the slot is you're close to doing the slot. There's just one little element that's out. So what caught my attention with the slot strategy is how it leverages or how important timing is. So as a math teacher, I revisit. When I was teaching, I revisited. And in middle school and high school, that often takes the form of a warm-up or an opener every day. And my warm-up and openers, bell ringers, would always be on something I'd previously taught. And I'd bring it back. So that's my revisiting, kind of like a spiral. But what caught my attention with this body of work is it's not just the revisiting that's important, it's that you're revisiting in specific windows of time. So what they found is you want to hit it at least 2 times, 3 times if possible, in these very specific windows. And what was most interesting to me is the first window that is important for retention is 28 to 42 days after you teach something is when you should try to revisit it. Now you can revisit it anytime in between there and after, but what the science tells us this is these windows have a bigger impact on long-term retention. And the other thing I want to point out, as far as these windows, this is timing. So you are counting every day that ends with a Y or calendar days. So when you teach something to when you revisit it, you're going to count Saturdays, Sundays, Monday, holidays. All of that is the spacing element. And this is something that is very, very important. So the 2 mechanisms or the 2 windows of time that help with retention in the slot is that you specifically revisit something in a 28 to 42 days after it was taught, and then again 2 months later. So what you're going to see in all these retention strategies, it's a recursive system that you build. And in the slot, what you're paying attention to is the window of time. So at the simplest level of this technique, if I'm going to do a review activity today, so let's say we're still in school, I'm going to do a review activity today. The topic that I would pick, how I would determine that is I would simply count every day backwards. Saturday, Sundays, backwards 28 to 42 days. So I've got a window there. I'm going to look in that window. What is important in that window? And what do kids often struggle with? And then that is what I would revisit today. Then I would make sure 2 months later, I would hit it again. Now, it will more than likely show up in between there, which is fine. but we want to make sure that we're hitting high priority problem areas in these windows of time. So if this is a strategy you want to dig into, the very first thing you want to look at is, okay, when I decide to do a review activity, am I at all paying attention to the window of time? So I'm an elementary teacher. I have a center that's a game focused on something I previously taught. Well, that topic should be from 28 to 42 days previously. So that's something that as a teacher, I never paid attention to timing. I just said, okay, I taught it, I'm going to revisit it. Sometimes it was from the last chapter, sometimes it was from a long time ago. So that's the first thing is, are you at all paying attention to the timing? Now, not to insult anyone, but my general take, and I'm comfortable saying this, is we're probably not. We don't really get to this level of specificity. So that's your first question. Now, how does this play out? Well, if you aren't paying attention to the timing, what happens is you get a short-term boost that then fades away again. We're back to the same situation. So revisiting without paying attention to time is not as effective as revisiting paying attention to these windows of time. So if I kind of look over a calendar here, what we have here is, sometimes I see teachers seeing this better. So what we have here is what I call the typical review. So I spent 2 days on congruent triangles. Then I give a quiz. The purpose of that quiz is to see if kids are learning. If not, then I'm going to do some reteaching. Then at the end of the chapter, I give a test to see if they've acquired it. Before that test, I'm going to review. All of that does not change with any of the retention strategies. That is all focused on the initial front end of learning. What we need to do is, okay, so after they've demonstrated they've learned it, I then have to add in the spacing. So if I decide, you know what, in this unit here, congruent triangles is really important, my grade level, and kids struggle with it, especially if it's in different orientation. They can't line up the congruent sides, the different corresponding sides. If it's different orientation, that's what I'm going to revisit. So what you would do is you would count every day after those 2 days were spent. Count every day. When I hit the 28th day, that's when I can revisit the topic. And then 2 months later, I'm going to revisit it again. So that is precisely how you implement this technique. You have to pay attention to when you teach and then space out that review in 28 to 42 day increments. Now, I'm sure I have interventionists in the room in this session. You can't really do this in intervention unless you have the kids the whole year. What you can do in intervention is get the classroom teacher's slot plan and double dose it in intervention. But this is something that you need to do. But there are 8 steps to this. There are 8 steps to implementing this, and that kind of is shown on this diagram, but you chunk your year from day 1 to the last day of school in 4-week units. You look at what you're teaching in each window. You have a discussion about what are problematic. You're going to use some data. It could be end of year data. It could be benchmark data. You look at data, match that with your experience, and then you're going to pick your high priority areas. You're going to keep track of when you teach each of these topics. And then you're going to space out your slots. 28 to 42 days is slot 1, and then 2 months later is slot 2. So the slot technique is fairly focused. It's not designed to hit everything. So it's designed to hit the high priority areas that are consistently problematic. In other words, they keep forgetting it. So as far as the first cliff notes on the slot strategy, it's going to force you to pay attention to windows of time when you revisit, and there are 2 that are critical: 28 to 42 days, and then 2 months later. And that is the slot strategy. So the second strategy I want to get in, and before I leave that, I think you're close to the slot strategy because most schools are looking at data to identify deficit areas and then do something about it. So you already got 3 of those. So the only thing you need to do now is look at what time, the timing piece of when you're going to revisit it. All right, the second technique, interleaving practice. Oh boy, time is flying when we're having fun. Interleaving practice Of the three, this is kind of the newer one. And what it leverages is this idea of sequencing. In other words, the order of the problems that you give kids to practice. And I'm going to introduce another word in here called blocking. So we've got interleaving and blocking. And these are two really important things that we want to pay attention to. So what this technique requires teacher to do, what's the mechanism that forces the retrieval, is the sequence of the problems that you give the kids. So literally what I'm telling you to think about is, if you give kids a worksheet, what do they do for problem 1? What do they do for problem 2? What do they do for problem 3? So I'm not talking about, well, problem 1 is easier, problem 2 gets like that gradual increase progression of difficulty. I'm also not talking about, well, problem 1, 2, and 3 are in isolation. Problem 4 or 5 are word problems, which I'll save that for another day, but that's causing all kinds of issues with kids trying to figure out what operation to use, because they get used to, oh, the teacher just did addition, so all these word problems are going to be addition. But what I really want to bring your attention to is the vast majority of practice we're giving kids is blocked. Now we're going to have a compare and contrast between blocked and interleave practice. None of block practice is not bad, all right, but it has a very specific purpose. So block practice, start thinking about an activity you give kids. And block practice is when the activity is sequenced or structured in a way that the kids are practicing the same type of problem consecutively. So you just taught subtraction with regrouping. All the kids practice is going to be subtraction with regrouping. That's blocked. When we review often for a test, we tend to also block. So if all the problems are the same, like the addition with regrouping, that's your AAA sequence. Or I just taught systems of equations with graphing, then they're going to be practicing solving a system equation by graphing. That's all your A's. But if I'm doing a review where I'm going to do 4 kinds of problems, we tend to chunk them together. That is also blocked because they're doing 4 A's in a row, 4 B's in a row, 4 C's in a row. So block practice, what you need to recognize about block practice is its purpose is initial acquisition. So what that translates to for your classroom is when you're teaching something new, the practice that follows it should be blocked. And this is where we have to differentiate between kids that are not struggling in math, your really strong kids in math, your typical kids in math, and the kids that struggle in math. Your really strong kids in math do not need as much block practice as your struggling kids. So this isn't everybody gets the same block practice. Kids are going to need a little bit more based on their learning profile. But the key is block practice is only worthwhile while the kids are acquiring the concept or skill. Once it's been acquired, block practice becomes useless. In other words, it doesn't help maintain the skill. And a recent analysis showed 90% of the practice we're giving kids is blocked. So what happens is, if you block, kids get a lot of blocked, you're going to get a short-term bump, then quickly fades away. The forgetting curve kicks in. So the phrase I like to use with this is, block practice will give you short-term gain, but a long-term pain. And you're all experiencing this. You watch the kids learn, and then a couple of weeks later, it's like you never taught it. And they'll tell you you never taught it. Then they'll double down and say, yeah, you definitely did not teach us that. And then you start prompting them. Remember we did this? And all of a sudden they go, oh yeah, that's right, I remember. Because you helped them reconnect it. So that's what block practice ends up doing, is it gives us a short-term bump that fades away. So I just, go online, they're a dime a dozen. You can find any worksheet. A lot of computer programs are also initially blocked, although I'm starting to see a change in that piece. Games, elementary teachers, You love your games, you love your centers, but games by design are blocked. Kids are doing the same thing over and over and over again. So that doesn't mean games are bad. What that's telling you is the games should be used more on the initial acquisition phase. Once they learned it, the benefit of playing a game on skills that kids already learned is minimal or short term. So I've got these are a dime a dozen, but what happens is block practice eventually leads to bored brain syndrome. In other words, the kid's brain stop thinking, they're just regurgitating. They're just going through the motions. And although you'll get that immediate bump, it fades. And the fading is what is really bottlenecking us as teachers. So you teach, you test, they've learned. Now remember, I'm not talking 100%. 0 to 50 is a lot of learning. And then a couple weeks later, it's like you never, ever brought it up. So that's that short term that then fades. Well, that bottleneck is really causing us issues because when we teachers sense they're forgetting, we stop and review. Well, we're constantly stopping and reviewing, and that is messing up our pacing. And then it gets to be about February, and everybody is in full-blown panic mode because they're seeing the testing windows. And they realize, oh my gosh, I got to cover all this, plus I got to review. So this retention piece is really affecting not just the end term stuff, but also the initial teaching. So here's another example of block practice. So even though on this page it says it's mixed, so it's got a bunch of different things on it, it is blocked. So you got your A, B, B, C, 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 D, E, 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 F, F, F. It is blocked. Now, if I take away this worksheet, and now I have centers, there's a teacher-led station. Usually, if there's 2 teachers, there's often 2 teacher-led stations, and the rest are going to be independent, whether it's 3 or 4, 2 or 3, whatever. So often station 1 and 2 are games on stuff they just learned. So you're giving them practice to help them acquire it. But there's almost always a center station that is on a topic from a while ago. Well, 1, if it's not spaced, that's not going to help. And 2, if it's a game where they're doing the same thing over and over, you're going to get a bump for a couple of days, then fades. So games have purpose and utility, but they are not by design, the way they're designed, they really are not helping long term. So interleaving. So interleaving is the opposite of blocked. It is now taking 3 or 4 problems, and this is really important here. This is not 20 different problems on the page. It's 3 or 4 that then repeat 3 or 4 times. So these A, B, and C are different problems. And they do A, then they do B, then they do C. So this sequence creates a cognitive process that is forcing retrieval multiple times. The big difference with this and your warm-up is just an ABC. So they're only retrieving it once. Where in an ABC repeated fashion, they're retrieving each problem multiple times. So your warm-ups, and by the way, I did them for my entire teaching career. It's like going to the gym and doing 1 rep on an exercise. It's not really going to give us a long-term benefit. Where interleaving is this, it's almost like a HIT routine, high intensity. It's almost like a HIT where you're doing multiple things. It's creating this retrieval access between your long-term memory and your working memory that keeps information accessible. So we don't want to get rid of block practice. We need to add in some interleave. So here are some examples of interleave practice. So problem 1 is a measurement. Problem 2 is a quantity discrimination. Problem 3 is a solving basic addition problem. So what we have here is each problem the kid has to retrieve. I got to retrieve how to do measurement. I got to retrieve the technique for comparing numbers. I got to retrieve how to do this addition problem. Then they come back and they have to retrieve again. So the sequence of this retrieval in this interleave structure is what produces durable learning. Here's another example. So you got place value, telling time on an analog clock. I know I just sent some of the elementary teachers into full-blown PTSD. I know analog clocks are crushing everyone. Just like money, because no one does money anymore. No one reads an analog clock. Odd or even. So what we got is this is creating a cognitive process that is forcing multiple retrievals and execution. Retrieval, execution. And by execution, solving the problem. That is what is critical for long-term learning or durable learning. Here is more of a high school. I think this was a geometry teacher's take on IPF. These are all in the ballpark. There's obviously tweaks, so you don't have to do it this way, but here's your A, B, C, A, B, C, A, B, C. Most of the time, the teachers are listing the problems at the top of the page, and the kids work their way through it. So this is how you get that interleave practice. Interleaved produces the attentive brain. It's a brain that is continuing to fire. Each time it's firing, so it's not getting bored. And this is what we got to incorporate into our class. I don't see it yet, and publishers need to get on board with this. Computer programs, I think, is probably going to be the easiest way. And also, you can make these with ChatGPT and the AI. I've seen teachers right in front of me making on Magic School. You just got to get that prompt down. But this is becoming a lot easier to make because of technology. And some computer programs are also bringing it in. I don't want to dive into the research, but I do want to show you this because this study really captures what I'm trying to communicate here. Mass practice or block practice initially gives us a better result. So when you block practice and test the kids right away, you're going to get that bump. But as you move the test out farther, in other words, you go farther away, the block practice completely falls out, and that should look right now like the forgetting curve. That is exactly what is happening here. That is that forgetting where the interleave is being maintained. So yeah, they get an initial bump. So in your initial teaching of something in the chapter, you should be blocking. Once you test, you got to move to interleaving. It's the interleaving that's going to keep the skill in place. So again, when block structures dominates practice, you're going to see short-term gains, but long-term loss. So your question is going to be, where and how can we provide IPF practice opportunities? You can do this on the computer. There are some programs now that are allowing this. Some are actually set up for this. So look at what computer programs you have access to. What you need to look for is, can you control the sequence? In other words, can you manipulate the problem in the software so that you get this ABC piece? So the way you implement this is, I like to do this by month. List your skills by month. Decide which are dissimilar. That'll be where you struggle a little bit. You want to make sure they're dissimilar. If they're too similar, you get a blocking effect. I kind of like the 9 to 12 problem range. Elementary can go maybe a little more. Middle school and high school, if I'm teaching, I'm only doing 9, 3 by 3. And then try to do it 2 to 3 times a month. That's what I'd shoot for with the interleave practice. So again, and Jared and Chuck know this, my concern is people walk out of here thinking I said block practice is no good. Block practice is a critical part of the learning progression. It's just more important on the front end. Once they've learned it, we need to get out of the blocked sequence and into the mixed. And, this was a strategy that in hindsight made me really question if I was a good teacher or not, because everything I did was blocked. Matter of fact, when I was a special ed teacher writing IPs, one accommodation I put into every IP for kids that had goals in math was to chunk the problems together. So I'm saying block it for the kids. So blocked is important, but at some point it loses its effectiveness and it kind of becomes a waste of time. Interleaving is what's going to help with the retention. So I kind of tell teachers, after the chapter has been taught and learned and tested, anything in there can become eligible for IPF. It's after the initial learning with this. All right. Speed dating strategy number 2. Now we're going to do number 3, practice test retrieval. This technique can also get some really good benefits, but it's a little different retention piece. So the space learning and the interleaving tend to be a little more skill-based. The practice test retrieval is a little more on the conceptual kinds of things, like they got to explain something. So PTR has also been used in a lot of other subject areas, and science and social studies teachers love this technique, and you'll see why. But essentially, and I knew I was going to have the least amount of time on this one. It's kind of like a brain dump. What it requires you to set up is an activity where kids have to have an opportunity to recall something they've previously learned unassisted. So they're not looking in their notes, they're not looking in their book, they're not asking you, they're not with a peer. So that's the free recall. Unassisted, tell me what you can remember about. So last month, we learned about the Pythagorean theorem. We spent a whole 2 weeks on it. You guys got really good at it. And man, it's been a month. We haven't done anything with it. I want you to write down anything you can remember about it. Draw me a picture. So what I'm doing in that situation is I'm forcing the kid to go in and retrieve that information and write it down. It also has to be in a low stakes activity. So in other words, this one really can't be graded, should not be graded. The other ones you handle that however you want to handle that. This one, if you grade it, it doesn't work. Then there's feedback and self-reflection. You want to try to do this the same question 2 or 3 times a year. So I would do the Pythagorean theorem maybe a month after I taught it, then another month later, and then a couple months later. So it's a constant retrieval piece. But this technique has been very beneficial. But you should see why science teachers love it. Hey, we learned about photosynthesis last month. What do you remember about it? Hey, we spent a whole unit on why World War II happened. Tell me what were the 5 things that led to World War II. So you can see why science and social studies teachers love this technique. But it has 4 parts to it. You give the free recall, that kind of brain dump, usually going to be like 30 to 90 seconds. Then you give feedback. So you start talking about what they remembered and you fill in what they did not remember, or you emphasize the key pieces. You get the kids to kind of self-reflect. So how did you do on this? Did you recall it well? So now they're trying to regulate their learning, which our struggling kids do not do well. And it's low stakes. The low stakes is critical because of the 3, this is the one kids will push back on a little bit. They're like, I don't know, I don't remember anything. I don't have nothing to say. Because they're kind of used to this being a graded activity. So you got to communicate to them, hey, this is an exercise. And that's really why I have these 2 GIFs here, is this is really exercising the brain. This is a cognitive exercise of retrieving and pulling into working memory. So this is a little document that I encourage teachers. You don't have to do this. It's going to be done on a whiteboard. But if you kind of set something up like this, you can't mess up the technique. So number 1, what's the question? So this is where tell me what you know about the Pythagorean theorem, or in this case, it's about factoring. Then the kids have a space to jot down their note, like brainstorm. What do I remember about this? They can draw pictures, they can write things, formula, whatever it is. That's what goes here. Then you get to the feedback, and there's a couple of branches here. You can have the kids compare. So, hey, get with a partner. Compare what you guys wrote up here. If you both have the same thing, put a check beside it. So now you're focusing them. Put a check by what you agree with. And if your partner has something you don't have, write it here. That's where you have to be careful with the peer-to-peer, because if everybody wrote the wrong stuff, you kind of don't want them telling each other and then writing it. So you got to use your judgment. What has to happen is the teacher feedback. So, you're going to hit the 3 to 5 big things that you want to make sure they remember. So if this were the Pythagorean theorem, it would be, it can be used to find the length of any side of a right triangle as long as you have the other 2. You might bring in hypotenuse and legs. You might say a formula, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. You might say you're finding the length. It's going to be positive, whatever the things you want the kids to remember. And then you ask the kids, how'd you do? And then you have a conversation about, well, if you give a thumbs down, what does that mean? That means you need to come and see me for help. If you gave your thumbs up, you're good to go. So you're kind of helping the kids begin to regulate. Now, obviously, the way I do it is more slanted probably to grades 3 and up because I have them right. You can do this silent and they just kind of talk. I see this in kindergarten, first grade, almost in a carpet time scenario. So the summary of PTR is that you want to give kids regular opportunities where they have to do a free recall, so an unassisted retrieval, followed with feedback in a low stakes activity, so not graded, and a self-reflection part where they basically say, did I remember this or not? So that is your speed dating third strategy of the day. Now, I'm going to open up the questions, but before I open up the questions, I want to give you some resources. So if you are a member of CEC, so you might be special ed director, special ed teacher, interventionist, principal, there's an issue back in 2019 that I was a guest editor on. It's not all for math, but it's all about practice and retention. There's an awesome book that really gets into this, which is this From the Laboratory to the Classroom. Amazing. Talks about all these strategies. And what was struck me was these have been extensively researched, and interleaving is continuing to be extensively researched. But those are not free necessarily. This website over here, Retrieval Practice or retrievalpractice.org, is one of my favorites. It's housed out of Harvard by some of the main lead researchers on this, and they have a lot of free resources on there. And each of the strategies has a practice guide. And on the practice guide, it's not math specific. So I've taken I've taken what I know about what happens in a math class, and I've taken the strategies and made it in a way that can be accessible, that gets to the classroom. But if your first step after this session, if one of these said, ooh, I think I like that one, go to this website, get the practice guide. They're like 12 or 13 pages. Read that. That's your first step. Then start having discussions with your peers about how you might bring that into play. All right, so I'm gonna unshare if I can figure out how to do that. Let's see. There we go.
All right.
There
So
we go.
I want to take some time, and I want to thank Dr. Paul Riccomini for being here. I also want to thank everybody who attended this session. We are having a little hiccup with the chat right now, so unfortunately, we're not going to be able to take questions. However, we will get that fixed, and you will be able to ask questions. And I'm sure Dr. Riccomini is very open to having anyone email him and have this conversation. He is an expert about retention and all these strategies. So he is a great resource to reach out to if you do have questions. I also want to say that if you are looking to receive credit for these sessions as you attend, that can be found under the credit tab on the conference website. So if you go to events.patent.net, you click on the credit tab after you log in, it should have full instructions on how to do that. And that's going to be under your My Schedule tab, where you're going to be able to check that you attended certain sessions and then fill out questions pertaining to them so that you can get credit. Oh, it looks like that our chat has been fixed already. So if we do have a few questions, we might be able to have Dr. Riccomini answer those.
Yeah, the handout is should be in the events page or on that Google Drive scan.
Yeah, and if you go to events.patent.net and you go to the schedule or the My Schedule tab,
There it
it
is.
looks like someone put the link into the chat. You should be able to see any handouts that the presenters have provided to Patent.
So the first question I want to address is Jason about like how to practice with slot. I would do interleave with slot, but I would also add in a little bit of teacher instruction in there. I tend to focus slot on very focused on one problematic area. But the key is the spacing. So as long as you're spacing, you can definitely intermix. So the bigger question here that Jason says is, these were all separately researched strategies. To my knowledge to date, none of them have been tested against each other. So they've all been researched as separate entities. But most all of us researchers are saying you need to combine some of these. So for example, interleaving, whatever 3 problems I put on my interleaving, I would make sure they're spaced at least from 28 to 42 days ago. So now I'm leveraging the interleaving mechanism and the spacing mechanism. Let's see. Well, this session was recorded. I don't know when it's going to be made available, but it will be made available at some point. Thanks, Lauren. Put the website in to, let me see here. See if I can copy this into the chat. Yeah, all right. I just put the QR code in the chat. So if you scan that, it'll take you to the handouts, plus all 3 of the practice guides are in there. I did not know I could copy a QR code into that bit. All right. I thought there were nothing in the chat, Chuck, because I was being so crystal clear in my
that was
question
that was
there'd be
initially
any
why.
questions.
Yeah. So yeah, this was a great opening keynote. So again, thank you, Dr. Riccomini, and thank you to all of you who attended. Our next session will begin at 9:30. You can find the Zoom link for that session on events.patent.net, as well as that credit tab to make sure that everybody's getting credit. Thank you, and we will see you at the next session.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of your conference and enjoy that summer if it ever stops raining.
A lot of appreciation in the chat.
Love it. You're making me feel really important, way more than I actually am. And my email is in the materials too, so feel free to email me.
Great. So, all right.
Are you going to be with me at the 2:30 session, or will I have somebody?
I believe I am not in your session. I think I'm with somebody else. 2:30. I think I'm hold on, let me check. Yes, I am with Jenny Root.
Oh, good. Tell her I said hello.
Yes, absolutely. It looks like
Yeah, Brandy,
you will have Lauren.
my next
You'll have Lauren.
session, my afternoon session today at 2:15 is focused on scaffolding reasoning. So that's going to be a technique that is designed to kind of interact with their working memory and reduce it. So that's at 2:15.
Great. So I see there's a question about the code for credit. We're not doing codes. You will log into events.patent.net, and there is a tab when you sign in that will say credit. You click that and it will give you the directions on how to get credit for each session that you participate in.
So looking at Cass's question, I think if you're going to do the slot, whatever topic you pick, so forget the math, forget illustrative math. Whatever topic that you slot, it has to have been taught 28 days ago. So that's the key with that. So if you're spending my guess is on that 8-week unit, there's more than just one thing happening in there. But maybe slots not what you want to do, and I don't know enough about illustrative math sequencing to make that decision. Maybe you want to do interleaving, but the key with slot is 28 days after it was taught is when you want to hit. It's those windows. So it's kind of it's irregardless on how long a unit is. It's just if you pick something out of the unit, you want to revisit it 28 days after. I don't know if that helps or not.
Yeah, so I mean, I think to Cass's question and to what you were just speaking to, like you can, right, as long as you have the time and that you can pinpoint or target a skill that you could then map out to 28 days at least later.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Cass. You want to, for slot, you need to kind of micro dose. In other words, you want to focus it down. So a slot is never going to be, hey, we're going to revisit regrouping. It's going to be, hey, we need to revisit regrouping across a zero because that's where the problem is. So it becomes focused. Yep, you got it. All right, Chuck, I got to get to my eye doctor before my next session. I couldn't really see anything today, but
Oh no. Well, thank you.
um,
We appreciate you being here, and we'll see you at 2:15.
thanks everyone. Hope to
All
see you
right.
in the afternoon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.